Continuing our conversation with Dr. Gary Jones, when we last spoke to you, you told us a great story about Mr. Weiser and how he really stepped up after 9/11 as the girls' homes got built. I do want to talk about your staff, but you also have a good conversation that you'd like to relate with Bill Hazel. And these are very strong leaders in terms of your founders.
They really are. And, you know, for 25 years, you could see Bill Hazel's imprint on Youth for Tomorrow every year and what he would do for us. By the men that he introduced to Youth for Tomorrow, such as Mr. Weiser, Mr. Pruitt, but also by his own vision and philanthropy. You know, there was a time I went to his office, and because we'd raised the money and we were going to decide where to build the school. I mean, I had make some presentation to the trustees on that, so I went to Bill and he said, "Gary, there's something on your mind. I can tell." And he, "What is it?" And I said, "Well, got to decide where to build this school." He says, "Where do you want it?" And I said, "Well, where I want it would be a very costly venture because it's all rock underneath our grounds here." And he said, "Gary, where do you want the school?" And I said, "Bill, I just can't ask that of anybody to step up and do all the dynamiting of the rock and laying of the water and the septic and everything to get to the school. Because all of that, those utilities were all up at what is now the Hazel House, not down here, 300 or 400 yards away into school." And he says, "Gary," and he had this styrofoam cup he'd always roll in his hand, and he'd always poke his thumb into it, and keep working it over, and he finally put the cup down and he said, "Gary, where do you want the school?" And I said, "Well, wouldn't it be nice to have it as you drive in the driveway, and at the Y in the driveway, if the school was right there, so it greeted everybody who drove up to campus." He said, "That's what we're going to do. That's where it's going to be." Well, bless his heart, the man had such a great heart, and that's why he is so important in our history. He was always there for us. And the Courage House, as it is known today, it was built by the Construction Association folks. It wasn't just the school that Bill had a role in putting there, but there was a meeting when we were about ready to close down Youth for Tomorrow because we were bankrupt in 1996. So we called a meeting of the trustees and the advisory board together, and we made a proposal to the boards, and Joe had flown up for it. I think he was like, okay. But we all sat around this table at Virginia Power, and I said, "Here's what I would like to see us do, is build a transition home for boys." And Gary Garzinski spoke up and he said, "I think the Heavy Duty Contractors Association in Northern Virginia could build that for a cost." And I said, "That would be a great idea." He said, "Give me a week and I'll get back to you." Well, Gary Garzinski got that support, and Bill Hazel was a huge presence with all contractors in Northern Virginia. So we built that home thanks to Gary Garzinski and to Bill Hazel. So that's another part of Bill Hazel's imprint on the growth of Youth for Tomorrow. And it goes on with other things that when I first came on board as a consultant in 1988, Bill was oriented towards private philanthropy, didn't want to pay somebody to raise money. They didn't pay me much, I might add, but I had to borrow $30,000 for the first 2 months to get mortgage payments and clothes and car payments and everything else done, but that's beside the point. But we get through with that meeting where they offered me the job through Joe, and Bill called and he said, you know, Gary, if you're going to raise money for us, we better get you started, and started right. So he said, my brother Till and I would like to host a fundraiser for you. So in July of 1988, we held our first fundraiser, other than those things that selling raffle tickets to build a house and an annual auction for operating expenses. But it was all with the leadership, the forceful but gracious leadership of Bill Hazel. And that night we raised, it cost anybody who came to it $15,000. I mean, that was 1988. That was a lot of money in those days, like it is today. But we held it in a tent on the driveway, and a reception was inside the home. And Bill introduced me to all these guys, and Cecil Pruitt was one of those, the first time I met Cecil.
Wow.
So Bill's imprint is just constantly here.
Sure. Your staff is universally acclaimed. What are some of your concepts when it comes to hiring? Because that's something that we've heard consistently, that really one of the big strengths of this effort is the staff.
Well, we want every staff member to be a Christian, a practicing Christian, preferably a believing born-again Christian. And so we're careful with how we present ourselves so that we don't violate any laws. But if you tell the story right with people when you're talking to them about coming here, just identifying who we are. Christ is first in our lives here. He's given us His grace. And if you're comfortable working in an environment like that, then we welcome you here if you have the professional credentials that we're looking for a teacher, a clinician, a case manager, residential counselor. Even those that don't interface with children, we expect to be God-fearing, Christ-centered people in our finance department, our budget department, IT department, campus operations, whatever.
The impact left on these students, however, from your staff is ongoing. Again, back to who you hire, what you think about when you're hiring someone. That is, I would think, one of the most important things that a staff member could pass on to these students, that they still praise them dozens of years after they've left. Their fondest memories are the staff.
They clearly are. We invest in our children with our love, as well as the skills that folks bring to us for their vocational backgrounds, professional backgrounds. And our kids know that. Many of them have never had a loving parent. 75% of our kids who come here have no father in their lives. And 50% have no mother in their lives. So seeing adult males and females here who love them, care for them, encourage them, is something they haven't experienced. And it takes a while for them to trust us. And then it all goes on from there.
The national accreditations that this location has garnered gives obviously everyone the feeling that the great days are ahead for Youth for Tomorrow. How much of that comes from the staff?
Well, it all does. With the Lord's grace, we became an accredited school with the state of Virginia in 1997. It was one of the first things that I wanted to see that we did, so that we had credibility in the minds of the public school system that took our children back when they graduated from our program. But it wasn't really enough when you start branching out throughout all of Northern Virginia, the Commonwealth of Virginia, and now we're getting kids from around the country and even around the world. There has to be an independent third party that can evaluate us and tell us, okay, you're good, but you can do better if you do these things. So we have 3 national accreditations now. One is for the corporate entity itself, so that any donor will know that we are a viable organization, that we are totally transparent with our budget, with the 990 that we file every year. It also covers the residential program on campus. The second one we went for was the Joint Commission out of Illinois. And I mean, you really have to have accredited, certifiable people that provide clinical services to your children. And the Joint Commission that certifies us as a nationally accredited therapeutic center is the same one that certifies hospitals programs. So it's a very high standard that is applied to us. And then we have the national accreditation for our secondary school. So we have the corporate entity being accredited, certified by an independent evaluator out of New York City, which is a worldwide association. There's the one for the therapy that we provide for our children and adults, and there's the school for our 7 through K-12.